In the annals of military history, there are countless stories of strategy, heroism, and conflict. But among them stands one campaign so unusual, so baffling, and, yes, so absurd, that it sounds more like satire than fact. This is the story of how Australia, in 1932, declared war on a group of flightless birds, and lost. This is the Great Emu War.
To understand how a country ends up fighting birds, we need to rewind. The early 1930s were tough in Australia. The Great Depression had hit hard, leaving many without work. Thousands of veterans from World War I had been given farmland in Western Australia to help them rebuild their lives. But farming is never easy, and these new settlers were up against poor soil, limited rainfall, and, soon, the emus. Every year, after breeding season, tens of thousands of emus migrated inland to coastal regions, searching for food and water. In 1932, their path led them straight into farmland. For the farmers, this was a disaster. Crops were trampled, fences smashed, and wheat, a vital source of income, devoured by giant flocks. The farmers were desperate. Their solution? Call the government. The Minister of Defence at the time, Sir George Pearce, responded. But instead of more fences or agricultural aid, he approved a military solution. And so, Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery was dispatched, along with soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns, the same weapons used in World War I. The mission was clear: reduce the emu population, protect the farms, and restore order. The campaign began in November 1932. The soldiers expected quick success. After all, how hard could it be to outgun some oversized birds? On the first day, the troops spotted about 50 emus. They opened fire, but the birds scattered almost immediately. Only a handful were killed. Day after day, the pattern repeated. Emus traveled in small, fast-moving groups. They were difficult targets, agile, fast, and surprisingly tactical in their movements. Major Meredith himself remarked that if the emus had been soldiers, they'd make formidable opponents. They seemed to employ military tactics: one bird would act as a lookout, others would dart in unpredictable directions, and they were astonishingly resilient. There are reports of emus being shot multiple times and continuing to run, shrugging off bullets like feathered tanks. Emu War spread quickly. Newspapers reported on the absurdity of soldiers failing to defeat birds. Cartoonists had a field day. Public opinion began to shift. Some ridiculed the government, saying it was embarrassing for Australia's military reputation. Others sympathised with the farmers, who were still losing crops daily. Meanwhile, the soldiers weren't faring any better. The emus outmanoeuvred them at every turn. Heavy rain even jammed the soldiers' equipment. By early December, less than a month after it began, the operation was called off. The military had fired thousands of rounds of ammunition, but estimates suggest only about 200 emus were killed, out of a population of 20,000. In other words, the birds had won. After the failure, the military withdrew. Farmers were still left with their emu problem, but now the story had taken on legendary proportions. In later years, bounties were placed on emus, which proved more effective than machine guns. Farmers and hunters were paid for each bird they killed, and eventually the population was brought under some control. But the Great Emu War remained a symbol, not of victory, but of absurdity. Even decades later, Australians look back on it with equal parts disbelief and humour. It's remembered as the time when soldiers with modern weapons were humbled by a flock of giant birds. At first glance, the Great Emu War seems like nothing more than a funny story. But it also reveals a lot about the challenges of the time. It highlights the desperation of farmers in the Great Depression, the limitations of government responses, and the resilience of nature against human attempts at control. And it's a reminder that not every problem can be solved with brute force. Sometimes, you just have to adapt. The Great Emu War might not be in your school textbooks, but it deserves a place in history for its sheer absurdity. Australia went to war with birds, and the birds won. So next time you see an emu, remember, behind those beady eyes is the undefeated champion of one of history's most unusual battles.